So I wanted to start with the whole Hemlock and 8th issue and get your thoughts on how you thought that went with the residents there and everything, and the feedback you got, and maybe the path that the council decided to take on it. Did you think it was a good path to take for now, or maybe just kind of wrap all that up for us, if you would, and give us your thoughts on how you thought the presentation went and the direction the council decided to take?
Ultimately, I'm very happy with it. After the last meeting 2 weeks ago, as you know, a lot of residents came to that meeting, voiced their concerns. The big concerns were, of course, what are we going to do with the lot? But then the big issue was safety, parking, everything else. So after hearing so many of them, and they were clearly irritated about it because they didn't think we looked at everything. I went over there that following Wednesday and Thursday, and spoke to residents there, kind of watched it. That following morning, Wednesday morning, I sent a letter to the email to the chief saying we need to go over there and we need to review this. Also, Dan Connect and Tom Turchi, we need to look at this from a safety and a traffic point of view. I know they all did what they did. I believe it went to
Board of Public Works.
Board of Public Works, and it was there. I know the chief sent out a thing on social media about the parking. So I thought that was all very positive. The dialogue with the residents was very good. They appreciated the fact that there was hands-on communication. I know Jason Zaleski had been over there. I had been over there. So I believe all that was good. Then when it came up, actually on Friday, I saw it come up on the agenda that, that we did only get one offer, if you will, from that RFP, and it was Habitat. And so right away, I was in California and I saw that, and I called Carrie Weister, is one of the residents over there. Let her know that it's on the agenda. So tell all your neighbors, and I'll be over on Sunday if you have any questions. So Sunday I went over there. I was over there for a couple of hours speaking with the residents, and they kind of knew when they came. They had done a lot of research on it themselves. One of the gentlemen that was there last night was in an accident. And so those residents and a couple more came last night, again, expressed their concerns. I did think it was of note that many of them said thank you for listening. I thought that was really good that they did that to the council. And then the whole argument that came, or not argument, that's the wrong term, discussion was about putting this off for a year, which they decided to do. And I think justly so, because realistically the school board is looking to, they're doing the big athletic thing over at the high school, which I think is great. They're also going to do some additions there to the fields, the track and whatnot. They're going to update those, put a lot of money into it. Feasibly, if you are going to be putting that kind of investment into those fields, you're going to want to attract more people coming in, which leads you right down to you're going to need parking. So this pause gives us time to go and really take a look, to deal with the school board. Alderman Jacek and I are making contact with them to get together to go over this issue specifically. There's no set time or anything like that. We're just in the preliminary, let's get together type of mode. But ultimately, I think holding it off a year, really evaluating what's going on, getting a clear idea of what's going on traffic and safety-wise is the best thing. So I really think the council made the right decision.
I agree with what Bob said. I think it was very thoughtful. It was good to see those residents come back and express concerns, and again, thank the council for their willingness to listen. And I think council is listening. Some people think staff goes through these kind of issues and goes back to their desks and feels, they didn't go where we thought they should go, or they didn't follow recommendations or whatever. I think the reason staff brought this forward to begin with is we own a parcel of land that we really aren't using directly for ourselves. We think ultimately there should be some disposition to the school, to neighbors, to a developer. But the council, I think, made a wise decision to say, look, it doesn't have to happen today. Maybe we watch and see what happens with the school district's plans, how that affects traffic patterns and parking needs. I think staff will come back at some point down the road and remind them that ultimately I don't think the city has a purpose in owning a vacant property like this that's not improved. But again, there's no time restraint or constraints on that discussion.
Carrie Weister, you mentioned you spoke to her, and she mentioned that you had spoke to her a couple times. At this point, it's been brought up a couple times in conversation how that land was deeded to the city in the first place, and if there's any restrictions that were a part of that deed process. And we talked about it the last time we met. Where are we at in our investigation on that?
Yeah, we are having a title search done, and I don't believe we have the results yet. Nobody at staff level, including people who've been here for 20 plus years, has any recollection that it came to us via a donation that had restrictions like this must always be used for park purposes or that type of thing. But we have taken their concern very seriously, and we are hoping for the results of that title search soon as to how this came to us. Were there any stipulations on it? And this plays into what's already been said here today, and that's that time is a good thing. It allows us to do more study on that, along with the parking and traffic needs.
Will you make that finding public when you?
Yeah, we can certainly do that. It'll be nothing we want to hide behind. If we do find that there's a dedicated park purpose that no one knew about, that will change the game significantly. So, yeah.
For the next year, does the city plan to address any of the concerns with like the ditch or any of the safety concerns that were brought up?
The safety concerns are being reviewed to go over there because the residents brought up some real serious things, and I think it's incumbent on us from a safety standpoint to get over there at the hot times, which from the residents there is in the morning during drop-off. And then in the afternoon, I believe the one gentleman said he lives right there at that corner. I think he said Palmetto and 8th, and he
Correct.
said people are going through the red light or the stop signs and whatnot. So we've really got to get in and do that because although there's not been much in the way of traffic collisions or anything like that, the last thing that we want is to brush this under and then a child get hit. That's the last thing we want. Accidents are something that sometimes there's nothing you can do. But since we know that this is a hot spot, it's incumbent on us, I think, as a city to get over there for the safety concern. But I would like to acknowledge all the residents that came because I think this shows the power. Number one, it shows that the council is listening to the residents. And number two, the residents came and voiced their opinion. And that's really how city government can really do a great job for their residents because without their input at the meeting when all of the aldermen are present, nobody would have known about maybe these other issues going on that are significant. So I applaud the residents that came, even though that they were upset and they were upset with council, and I get that, I understand it, but that's really the way you affect change is to come and communicate your issues, and then they had reciprocal communication. So I think they did a great job.
Yeah, and if there's one myth I'd like to get rid of over my time here, it's this idea that the council and the mayor and city staff are not listening to the concerns raised. Boy, you get 2 or 3 or 4 people come to us in a setting of a meeting or with emails or phone calls, you'd be surprised. It gets attention real fast. Suddenly, something we hadn't been talking about before becomes a hot topic. So the idea that the person sitting at their home and says, why do I bother to email? Why would I bother to call or go to a meeting? That's really flawed. People listen to you, and these become discussion topics at our meetings.
What is the relationship between council members being able to actively participate in a discussion with things that they're committed to as far as like civil duties? You know, for example, if you mentioned that you had one Habitat for Humanity put in a proposal. Members of council that might have affiliation with Habitat for Humanity, do you ask them to abstain from discussion?
There's a law that goes beyond us that says nobody should participate if they have a conflict of interest. Now, a legal conflict of interest is defined as somebody who basically is going to have money put in their pocket based on the vote. Some people say I have a conflict of interest. My brother-in-law used to work for that company or something, and it gets kind of far afield. But we do like people to identify if they are a member of an organization. Let's say there's a person on our council, and I don't believe that there is, but maybe I'm wrong, who is actually a member of the Habitat for Humanity Board of Directors. That would be good to identify and say, look, I'm not going to participate in the discussion. I, at the very least, have a perceived conflict of interest in what my vote would be. We have a couple of committees, and there's a discussion about it that Pete Hendler is bringing up in the background here too, about maybe putting that on all of our agendas for the council and all the committees. We have it on EDB right now. We've added it to finance, budget, and personnel. Right after roll call basically that says, are there any conflicts of interest on any agenda items? Get those out in the beginning to say, look, I won't be discussing item number 5 because I have a conflict. But I'm not aware, with Habitat for Humanity, I've not been made aware of anybody who has either a legal or perceived conflict of interest, at least not yet.
So no one publicly made a statement last night they were affiliated in one means or another with Habitat for Humanity or had a conflict of interest on that particular topic.
Not to me. I heard nothing of that nature. I know we have a couple people who are certainly proponents of what Habitat for Humanity does, but I've never had it said to me or hinted to me that they have a role in that organization that would make their participation uncomfortable.
Are you guys, I don't know, are you somewhat disappointed that you only got one proposal back when you put out the RFP for the property?
Yes, and that's the reason is I think there were stipulations on what the proposal would be. And, in essence, an RFP is the equivalent of going out and putting up a for sale sign in this particular instance. But when you put parameters on what it is, then you narrow the playing field significantly. And so to only get one, yeah, that is an issue. But if we would have had 10, I don't think it would have changed the dynamic of what took place last night.
Kind of coming back, and this is kind of going to jump through a bunch of them. There was a lot of discussion about using other agenda items to have leverage over the school district. Do you think that's going to help in relations with the school district going forward, that the council had basically a 6-4 vote to say, we're not going to give you your zoning unless you do what we want?
That's a great point, because I was thinking something very similar at the time. We're certainly not looking to do that, but the issue is clearly there. Residents there that are right there and see it every day, see the issue in the morning at 8 o'clock, in the afternoon at 3:15, and then last night, before many of the residents came, they stated, I think, that there was a middle school football game,
Yeah.
so there was 50 to 60 cars in there. They see it all the time. So this gets into the argument that I was talking about earlier on if they're going to be, if the school district is going to be improving that area, you would only think that they would need more parking so that we don't lose that. So this is really, I think, the right time. Did it bleed over? Did it kind of sound like that? Yeah. That's kind of, I read that the same way. But I don't think it's nothing can be forced or anything like that. It's just kind of this makes perfect sense. I believe now we're going to have this discussion. And realistically, I believe that the council and myself, we need to, I'm not aware of what the relationship is right now with the school board. I don't know in the past if there's been any dialogue or camaraderie or conversation, communication, which is why Alderman Jokic and I believe Zaleski said he'd like to be involved, just to go have discussions. Yes. But certainly if as in anything, you've got to make sure that if you are going to open a business or anything, you got to make sure you have enough parking. So I think it just kind of bled over into it.
Some of you may remember that we had a joint meeting between the school board and the council about 5 years ago. We'd intended to make it at that time kind of an ongoing, like once a year deal, annual. There were some concerns raised about it. The first one was a little bit fluffy, for lack of a better term. It was mainly just to get to know each other and, hey, what are you guys working on? Here's what we're working on. We didn't have very many meaty discussion topics. We talked at that meeting about identifying some, like joint purchasing of health insurance or equipment and supplies and some other things, but we never really got back to it. Got a little bit of negativity from it. We need to get back to that. We need to have an annual, or at least every 2 years, meeting between the council and the school board with some real issues. I mean, something people can sink their teeth into and maybe get some cooperation going. As far as the issue of what happened last night, I respect what people were saying. I think it kind of was conflating two issues a little bit. I think if this had been a request to approve the actual campus master plan, then the parking and traffic and some of these issues would have fit better. I think they wanted to put a place marker down, or kind of a bookmark the fact that they really want to see the school board and the school district come to the table to resolve this issue on the area of 8th and Palmetto in a meaningful way. I'm glad that the ordinance passed. It allows city staff to continue working with them on heading toward a campus master plan for their improvements. But the point has been made. These issues need to be evaluated.
Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna move on to pool, but if you're not ready.
Oh, have there been any, at any level, even discussions with the school district saying, hey, if you guys want this, you need to get on it soon because we're going to, when there's a chance we're gonna sell it? Or have there been no communications at all between the school and the city?
As I think has been noted at the meetings, we went to the school district 2 years ago roughly. At that time, they didn't have any interest. And part of the reason they didn't have interest, and they still probably don't for this reason in part, is that we would require them to pave it and put some landscaping around it, make a real parking lot out of it, a formal parking lot instead of an informal parking surface. And they weren't interested in paying for that upgrade, and they said, we're making some other plans for the future. We're not really interested. Do what you need to do. And during this last couple months of discussion, recently in fact, Justin Casperson, our Parks and Recreation Director, went back to the school district staff and said, you've heard some of the debate about the concerns. Do you have any interest now, or would you potentially have interest in taking possession of that and being responsible for it, making a real parking lot out of it again? And they said, not really. I will say this, that they are hearing loud and clear the concerns, and I think it would behoove us to go back and, as part of the thing that Josh is doing with them on the master plan, make sure that parking, in particular parking, along with traffic and some other ancillary effects, is taken into account. People are seeing what's going on at 8th and Palmetto. They're hearing the neighbors, and they're thinking, what about other areas? What about by Becker and what's going on by the high school? Are we accounting for all those types of impacts in a way that residents will feel protected from the growth and development?
And one last one on that. How much is it actually costing the city to maintain that triangle of land? Do we have a rough estimate of a number? Can we get that?
We can look at that. It's not a lot because we're not doing much.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a certain amount of filling the holes and making sure that there's no immediate hazards. The way I'm picturing that lot, though, the maintenance is very nominal.
Okay.
But I'll see if we have something.
Sure.
So Mayor, the pool issue moved forward last night, I guess, sort of, with what, a challenge grant? Maybe just summarize what you heard there or what you thought about it, and is that, maybe a good direction or a good place for this to go, or at least start in terms of the financial aspect of this project?
It appears to be a good start. The challenge grant is there that basically the city will match dollar for dollar for donors. So it's another public-private working together, which I think will be good. And it really does make sense to get the public input there. Alderman Jokic was, he brought up the idea and it didn't get any traction. But where we don't do anything, we just as the city go out and do, borrow for it and then, in essence, increase taxes by, I believe that he said $32. They did a study on how much would that $6 million cost the taxpayer. I believe it was $32 to $33
Over 20 years.
Over 20 years, which he equated to a McDonald's meal. And realistically, raising your tax like that, and I don't think everybody is going to be excited about that. But Mike Alderman Fire in District 1 brought up a very good point. He's like, there are some people that don't want to put in money for a park or a fire department or a library or a STEM building, but they do want to put it in for a pool. And so it really does make sense. And so we still have to go to the CIP next year to see, budgets are very tight. So where we're going to get $3 million, that's, it's something that we're very seriously going to look at, because my understanding is this whole pool idea has been on the dock here for
Long
about
time.
2 decades.
Yeah.
So, we need to get there to where we can either do it or we can't. We just can't keep kicking it down the road. So all in all, I think it went as well as it could last night from that perspective.
I think the issue with Chris Jokic, and I've talked to him about this many times, he feels very strongly that public improvements should be paid for by the city. The library and community center and the pool, for example, similar to a fire station. And in an ideal world, he's probably right. But most communities now, with their finances being strapped and borrowing ability being limited, look at pools and libraries a little bit differently than they do fire and police stations. If we put out a fundraiser for a fire station or a police station, I don't think we'd have a lot of people jumping to give us lots of money. Those are considered to be our core services. And I'm not trying to take away from libraries and pools, which are very important. But I think those are going to be increasingly by most cities and villages across the state, if they're not already, funded through public-private partnerships that involve a certain amount of city or village money and then a good share of donated money by people who want to see those improvements happen. So I totally respect them, but I think that realistically the idea that the city is going to bond for $6 or $6.5 million itself is not likely. As far as the challenge grant, it may seem a little bit gimmicky. You know, we've already talked about giving $3 million toward that improvement someday. To now say, well, okay, we're going to do it. If you give us $10,000, we'll match your $10,000. Sounds like a telethon or something. But I think part of the deal is also to say, look, we want you to be walking alongside of us. We want to commit to the fact that you're on board, we're on board. You want to give, we're giving. It's a team effort to try and get us to $6 million. And also trying to commit the city elected officials one more time, another sort of milestone. Are you committed to that point? If we get to $6 million total, we're going to build a pool. And I think the consensus is yes. We just have some work to do.
Do we feel that we're getting to a point where the community is, for lack of a better term, tapped out? I mean, we've had the YMCA project, we've had the library, we've had the stadium project. Are we getting the STEM building? Are we getting to a point that we just don't have donors anymore?
You know, that's another brilliant point that you bring up, because many people have thought of that, and which is why they were part of this study that was done, is to see what the appetite is for people, and which is why there are some people that would contribute to a pool that might not contribute to something else. So the belief right now is that there would be an appetite, but the real proof is going to be when we actually put that out there for the funds that start coming in. I will say this. The residents of Marshfield are extraordinarily generous. And if they feel that the funds are being used for something useful and good, I believe that they will come up with that money. But it's important for them to see that the city is committed to do it, because why would we ask them, okay, come up with $3 million and then, you know, we don't know if we could do it or not. So they were looking for that commitment. But your point is a very, very good point. We do believe that appetite is still there, though.
That's a great question, Stephen, and especially the YMCA project, because that's related to health and lifestyle and all the exercise stuff. But even STEM, library, the zoo, we've had fundraisers for projects out there. You do wonder if you're not just traipsing over the same ground over and over and over, kind of like a rain event that just never ends. But what we're really trying to find as part of this, and I think Justin is still looking for this, is some champions, some leaders to come forth and say, look, I'm going to go out there and talk to, excuse me, that this is an important project for our community. We need that groundswell to continue to build and to grow. That's what happened with the library. We had a campaign committee that was unbelievable, and they did a lot of the legwork. We need some folks like that to be stepping forward to be part of a campaign fundraising team to get this moving in a more significant way. And I think the money's there, but you're right, these other fundraisers make it difficult.
Then the last one on the pool, at least on my end, is there going to be plans in place if, say, we are only able to raise $2 million privately for a scaled back pool? Is that going to be something that's on the table, or are we going to wait till we have the full $3 million matched with the $3 million and build the $6 million pool that we currently are looking at?
Yeah, there is no plan to do that. Certainly, you can always look at scaling back at some point. I think if you start talking about that publicly, you lose a little bit of the enthusiasm from the get-go. There are places that have built pools like this for less than $6 million, and they're not far from us. I think Weston, and there's other examples, although costs go up every year. It's not fair to compare a 2020 project, which we're expecting this to be, to a 2016 project. But there are probably things we could look at to scale back the overall cost if need be.
Anything else on the pool?
Uh-huh.
October 2nd, Finance, Budget, and Personnel met to approve the creation of the position of City Forester and Foreman. Obviously, with the budget being an important piece of the conversation right now and budget shortfalls, why is the city in the position to create a position at the city garage for City Forester and a foreman?
Well, yeah, I'll start. If you remember that meeting, if you remember the memo that went out, I wish I had it right now, it actually wouldn't be adding cost because it's sort of reconfiguring. We have a person leaving and it's taking a position and kind of revamping that to our favor. So it's not a budget issue. But having said that, you'll be seeing at the next Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee that the pay grade for that, as established by our compensation consultant after looking at the duties, is higher than expected. So the committee is going to be faced with the fact that this would be a bigger cost item than initially thought, and it would not be a wash. It would be an expense. So the committee, I'm sure, will take a fresh look at that and say, okay, we were supportive of this when it was going to be dollar for dollar the same as what we're doing now, just kind of reformatting and adjusting duties. Are we still supportive if it's X amount more than we're spending today? That's where the rubber will probably be hitting the road.
So further on that question, one, why is that position being looked at being created in the street department versus not being created in the parks and forestry department?
They'll be working with people in the parks and recreation and forestry area. I think a lot of it is street trees, and that's really more correlated with the street projects that we do. EAB, for example, we're still working on all those issues with potentially affected trees in the terraces. It's a good question, Brandon. There's a street component and a park component that makes up our total tree maintenance and everything we do in that program. It probably could have been in either department. Streets is the one that seemed like maybe because of the street tree issues we deal with constantly was the more likely candidate.
So to reconfigure this position, was this position someone that was on the current snow plowing crew?
I'd have to look back. We have a lot of people who do snow plowing when need be, that it's not maybe their first and foremost duty. I'd have to check on that to see what percentage of time that person would potentially spend during the winter on plowing. When we get 10 inches of snow, it becomes kind of an all hands on deck kind of thing, but I don't have that answer right away.
And then the last question is, in the 2019 budget, are we entertaining hiring 2 additional staff people for the street department for lawn and maintenance and snowplow positions?
No. There's nothing intended for street besides this reconfiguration, if you will, of an existing position as we've had a retirement to make it a forestry focus. We have a lot of forestry things that people are doing now. Tim Rasmussen, maybe you know, has been actively involved in the EAB and some other things, but we've never had a dedicated position, a skilled, trained professional who knows trees, who knows arborist type of rules, regulations, expectations. That's what we're trying to create. But there's no intent of more positions following this. The question for the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee is whether or not they still want to do this transition to forester, given the fact it's not a wash in cost. It would be an additional expense over what we have today.
So this position, just to recap, is replacing a person that retired from the department, if that you said that correctly.
Basically, yes. It's taking a position and making it something different than a typical maintenance level 2 or whatever it is.
Who recently retired?
I don't have that at my fingertips.
Okay. I didn't see anything in the last month or 2 that there was a vacancy out there.
I should know this, but I don't. I'm pretty sure it's from a retirement. I know it's an open position that they're looking to reconfigure.
And I know Tim Rasmussen, he left the street department, correct?
He has taken another job, another position, yes, with Parks, I believe. But believe me, going back to where you started with this, the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee is going to be very acutely aware of the cost of what's being discussed now. And finding out that position is several pay grades higher than we thought is going to make them pause and have a new discussion about the value of the position. They may still go ahead, but it's not exactly what was first presented.
So in the process of doing that, last question, in the process of doing that, wouldn't we request the pay grade before we approve the authorization, the creation of the position?
No, the first request was to send it out. If you look at it, it may have seemed like we were embracing the position, but really we were just embracing the position enough to have Jen Raicu send it to McGrath. And she was surprised, as I was, to see how much higher that position was on our pay scale than we thought it would be. And we're going to bring it to the committee and say, what do you want to do? No, they didn't specifically say we're doing this. They said we want to send it to McGrath.
Are we going to see?
I was just going to mention, I can't remember when it was, July or August, if you go back and check the agendas under mayor's comments and then employee recognition, they did recognize somebody from the street department this last summer. It was 6 or 7, 8 weeks, 2 months ago. And that individual, it was under employee recognition. That was the guy who was retired.
So that we just never fulfilled the position.
it should be on the agenda.
Yeah,
I can't remember
prob-
the guy's name, but I remember that some of the guys from the street crew being down there for that employee recognition.
One of the things we,
Oh, that was the short guy.
The maintenance kind of guy.
we're live here at the.
That's who it was. Now that I think of it, that's who it was.
Yeah, and let me say this: if you don't know Dean Schiller very well, our new street superintendent, he takes every opportunity to look at possible cost savings or different ways of doing things. So I got to believe that when that person was indicating they were stepping aside, he said, "Let's take a look at what we have today before we just go out and refill it." And this forestry thing has been out there for a while.
I was just concerned that, to me, forestry and streets doesn't really fit. Parks, recs, and forestry fits a position. I get who's best to service the trees in the town. Some of that deals. I mean, there's more trees in the parks than there is in the fairways. If I would just think there would be more collaboration between parks and rec than there would be on this position, or maybe it's a joint. And we have a lot of trees, especially in the fairway, that are maintained less than what they are in the parks. And obviously it's due to salt conditions and things of that nature affecting the root systems.
One of the things that comes a lot with street trees is when we do projects, not just reconstructions, but even overlays sometimes, mill and place projects, is can those trees be saved? And the residents want to see every tree saved. And they say, hey, it's a nice tree. And we say it's 2 feet from the curb, and I'm not sure once we start digging. And a good arborist, a good forestry person can look down the road in advance and say, look, based on the root systems of these types of trees, here's what we can save, here's what we can't. Let's plan on replacing with this type of variety. I think it's as much streeted as it's park, but again, you can make the argument for either department.
A good trivial thing is, if you ever drive down Veterans Parkway, if you start at where the city garage entrance is the Veterans Parkway and travel towards Central Avenue, those trees were planted at the same time as all the trees that were planted on Veterans Parkway. From the city garage's entrance to Veterans to Central Avenue, those trees are either dead or undernourished. And once you pass Central Avenue, from there to Peach Street, those same trees are flourishing. A study was done by Bodendorfer Thesis Properties that the salty...
Has it been published yet?
Bodendorfer thesis for.
Yep, but there's a higher saturation of salt when they first leave the city garage on that eastbound traffic, and then they turn on the Central Avenue, so the salt never gets past Central Avenue to affect the growth of the trees.
I assume we're talking about Bodendorfer thesis intellectual properties.
Yes, and there is a strong case on that too, so you can keep that right here for
Well,
now.
That's right.
Brian Panzer told me once why the trees are falling under street. They've had all the equipment. They had the booms and stuff.
For trimming.
And they were out there already doing street stuff, and they were literally right next to trees many times. So they would take care of both while they were out there, and it would save. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in.
Speaking of that, so then are we gonna see, because I believe there's 3 or 4 positions out for pay studies right now, or are those all coming back at the next finance meeting?
The 2 communications ones are, and the accounting clerk one, I'm trying to think of the status of that one, but they're all making their way back in the next couple of meetings.
Okay.
Was there anything? There were 5 items, I believe, on closed session. Was there any action or anything coming out of closed session from the meeting that there was action on, or that we can talk about? Or can you give us an update on the closed session portion of the meeting?
Do you have anything you want to say, Bob?
You go ahead.
I guess really not a whole lot. I mean, we're obviously trying to decide what the next best approach is on the sale of City Hall Plaza, and but it's just a matter of looking at what we have today. We've had a couple fall through, and where do we go from here? The one I'd probably comment on more is the litigation with Walmart Menards, just to remind people what this is about. This is going on across the state, where Menards and Walmart, and actually other big boxes, are saying, look, we think our value of our properties in your community should be compared to a vacant building of ours somewhere else. And cities are fighting that, that the league is battling in Madison, and others are as well. I think the issue here you need to know is just that the council is very strongly standing by the fact that property taxes are important to us, that we respect people's right to contest them, but we're not going to willingly roll over and say, well, okay, whatever. We want to make sure that people are paying their fair share. We don't believe the dark store theory has merit as these businesses do. And, we're in partnership with the league and others regularly to try and see if we can preserve our right to have reasonable assessed values placed on these buildings and collect the taxes that we need to run the city.
So is there a court action or what is this litigation? What do you mean by that?
These court cases are going through the court system. Interestingly enough, they're going individually in the counties that they're located. So while we're talking in Wood County, you might see, Stevens Point in a case in Portage County at the same time, and they could decide that Marshfield is wrong and that Menards deserves a big reduction, and they could say that Stevens Point is right and they deserve that it should stay the same way it is. They're not necessarily all going to be the same outcome. I'm being led to believe from the League of Wisconsin Municipalities that cases that the cities have battled are actually going pretty well for cities and villages in terms of the final outcomes. Not everyone, but for the most part, many courts are upholding the fact that the dark store theory is not fully accurate and correct, but it's still a crapshoot. You go into court, anytime you go into court against anybody, that you might win and you might lose, it gives you some pause as to whether or not you're willing to consider a mediated settlement with a person or the business, or whether you want to go to the mat. And that's what communities are being forced to decide right now is it worth going to the mat with the possibility that we lose and have to give these folks a great reduction in value as opposed to negotiating some sort of settlement. But I think I can't talk much about what the council said, but I just want you to know that the council takes this very seriously and does not want to give up its right to what we believe is fair assessment willingly. It would be definitely with only if we feel that that's something we need to do to get the best outcome. Am I close?
You hit it right on the head.
Mayor, did I hear the fire and police commission president and the fire chief last night take a step back from adding 3 firefighter paramedics to the fire and rescue department? Did I hear that right?
Yeah, they ended up taking a pause. It had already been, they had done the fire chief, Scott Owen, does a tremendous amount of bookkeeping, and he knows every call, where they went, the revenue generated from that, and there was all the numbers that were there indicated that this was going to be make sense, because these 3 firefighter medics would be paid from the enterprise fund. In essence, the billing that comes from the ambulance when they do transfers or rescues and such. And there appeared to be such in there where there was a stumbling block at the very last minute, is the numbers calculated for depreciation and everything else. We knew personnel, what that cost, but there was some recent numbers that they were uncomfortable with, that they really wanted to see. Additionally, they had concern with the fact that there is the contract that we currently have with the clinic goes, I think, through June.
Yep.
And then right now we have no reason to believe that it won't be extended after that. I believe another 4 years. There's no reason to believe that it wouldn't. But I believe that there was caution on behalf of the commission on, wouldn't it be more prudent to wait until we actually had this 4-year, program there, so we don't get people on and then have to lay them off. So that was, it was a very last minute thing. The Mike Myers, the president of Police and Fire Commission, literally came up 5 minutes before the meeting to let us know that they were going to withdraw that. And this morning I've had conversation with the chief, and that was basically his explanation. So they're going to continue to crunch numbers and see what that final thing is, and then I believe they'll be coming back with that request.
I agree completely with Bob on what he said, and I expect to see them coming back. What happened on the accounting end is, we have enterprise funds like wastewater and EMS, and there's different accounts. So not only is there the account that Scott Owen, as fire chief, looks at all the time, but there are some ancillary costs that are charged to the EMS operation. Finance time that's involved in working on EMS matters, depreciation on vehicles such as ambulances, those types of things. So I think when Scott was first looking at it and he said, look, the revenue exceeds the expense by quite a bit, we've got room for these 3 people, he wasn't seeing that full picture. When you look at the full picture, it still works, but there's not much of a fudge factor. The difference between revenue and expenses, if we hired these 3 people, is nominal. So it gives you reason to pause and say, boy, there's not a lot of room for error there. If something happens we don't expect, maybe it'll flip and be slightly a negative as opposed to slightly a positive. So they want to take a look at this. They want to look at the fudge room that they have, see if there's some other things they can do to control costs, see if there's something that they want to do to reframe this. But I think the need for the personnel is there as long as Bob said, the contracts continue with the clinic. That's another question I think that some people might be wondering. What if the clinic were to decide not to continue this relationship? But I think you're going to see it back again, and I think they're going to be satisfied with what they see. But I do applaud them for pausing. Anytime you see that you don't have a lot of room for error in a budget, it makes you think about what could happen if the expectations aren't quite met, if you will.
Who is writing or facilitating the contract writing between a clinic and the city?
I believe the contract initially came from the clinic, actually MCHS Hospitals, for our review and approval. And I think you know by now that the Marshfield Fire Department entered into kind of a trial with them that first year to see how it worked for both sides. And the question being, would we cover our cost? Would it be good for us? Would it be good for them? And so now we can take a look at how that's written. I mean, there have been some questions raised. Are we getting what we should? Are we getting the dollar amounts for these runs that we ought to? I believe Scott Owen thinks that we are, and that we are covering our cost when we send people to Madison or somewhere else to make these facility transports. But we can always take a deeper look at the contract. You're going to see the Police and Fire Commission in the next couple of months, I think, talk about this a lot to make sure that they're not putting us in a bind where we wake up one day and say, gosh, we have to start laying people off. Sorry, but we have to lay off paramedics, and nobody wants to be there.
Prior to the presentation in closed session of that contract, was the city attorney involved in the contract writing?
The city attorney had initially reviewed the contract that came up in 2017 and given some thoughts. Yes, so he has seen it. He has given some response that I think was taken to heart. But at that point, the commission, I think, felt empowered that they were able to go ahead and execute this agreement. We've had conversations since with the city attorney. He's done some research that really this type of contract ought to be approved by the council, because even though we have optional powers in the city, that's for management of the operation. It's not necessarily for entering into contracts with private entities for services that go beyond your core reason for existence, if you will. And so from now on, as you see this contract approved and amended and renewed, it's going to be the council ultimately voting. And I think we've got that ironed out now.
So is there a contract that's been approved and in place and on file?
There's an agreement through next June on these advanced life support and interfacility transports. It's actually two separate agreements that run into the middle of the summer that outline exactly how this is going to happen, how they're paid, when they're paid, what our responsibilities are, what their responsibilities are. Correct.
And would you be requiring a longer term contract if you were to make a decision to hire?
Somebody may say that. Do we really want to enter into an agreement, or do we want to hire people before we know if they're willing to go out 3, 4, 5 years? I can tell you this. With the current contract terms, the MCHS Hospitals, Inc. was the one that proposed the 3-year extension. They want to do it. It was us saying, well, wait a minute, we got to look at this. As a council, should they be involved, and all these kind of things. So it wasn't like they were hedging it all on doing the extension. But if we start looking at the terms and saying, gosh, I think we ought to be having the clinic pay more, there may be some negotiations out of that. But are they interested in continuing this relationship? Did they make it clear that they wanted to do it through 2021? Absolutely.
You got questions on that? Since your appointment as mayor, or since your election as mayor, there's been several appointments that have been made on various committees. Mm-hmm. How are these appointments being communicated as vacancies throughout the community to encourage or to recruit people for those opportunities?
Right now, I believe it's just word of mouth as we're going out, and we're going to start making that more public so we can get more public input. I believe right now there's still a committee on aging and one for historic preservation that we need to fill. And we've primarily, to this point, been going out asking people, to be honest with you, and we've got to find a better way to communicate these openings. We don't get a lot of response because committees take time. We value all of them because these are people that volunteer their time and service. But we are looking at different ways to communicate these openings to people so more people know about them and become involved in the city.
Last night you made the,
Can I add to that for a second?
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. We need to be more creative and more effective in reaching people with available committee openings. I will say this, one of the things we used to do before Bob was here, but we would put on the agenda that there's an opening for the zoning board of appeals or whatever. But what happened was we had some of those that went on for so long that people literally became immune to that line item on the agenda. Yeah, zoning board of appeals, they've needed somebody since 200 BC. So that wasn't very effective either. We need to find other ways to use MCTV, website, Facebook, whatever, to make it known that people in the public can join us.
so you mentioned last night in X that there was no other interest in the position besides Kathy Banks. Is that statement true?
There were no other interest at this time. I met Kathy a few weeks ago. I know Steve had talked about it before, and I had other people that we had talked to, but we ended up choosing Kathy out of the ones that we saw. Michelle Brown actually contacted Josh to get on the committee, and she met with Bill and Josh, and then we talked, and I think she's going to be, both of them will be great appointments. Now her term, both appointments as well are coming up for renewal in 2019. So
So as mayor, if you're making the appointment and right now you're only using word of mouth as a means of distribution of this information, are you comfortable with those results?
am I comfortable with the results of the committee so far that I've appointed? Absolutely.
The number of applicants, so the number of people that have.
No, I would love to get I would love to get more applicants, and we need to do a better job of communicating that, of what is open. So that's one aspect that we really have to do better at, so that people are aware of where they can come and get involved in the city. The more the merrier, as far as we're concerned. So we'll do a better job of getting that word out.
And the last question I have, obviously we have an election in April for half of the aldermen. What is the city going to do as a public relations campaign to encourage more citizens to step up and run for office here in the city of Marshall? We hear a lot of conversation, a lot of noise about, government isn't doing their job, things aren't getting done the way we want them. What is the city going to do over the next 3 or 4 months before the December deadline of interest? We only have basically 65 to 70 days for people in the city to say, hey, I want to run for an alderman. Is that on the mayor? Whose accountability is, or where does that fall to get that information out there to encourage people to get involved? And if so, when do you guys take action on it?
We'll make it a point of public record, and I would believe we'd start doing that later on in October, and maybe even into early November. And then, of course, our media folks have always put that out there, so it's always out there. That's one of the biggest struggles that we have is you put it out there, but how do we get the people to see it? So we've got Focus, Explore, WDLB, Hub City Times, and Marshfield News Herald. All of our, these public entities are out there, or news entities, if you will, that are out there promoting this. So it's certainly out there. It's just a matter of people wanting to take interest actually to do that. I go back to when I ran as mayor. I remember seeing, I had an interest in it, I don't know, probably in August. And I saw the things that, once I finally saw that Chris was actually going to not go for another 2-year term, to be honest with you, I thought there'd be a lot of people running. And it ended up and there was a lot. I mean, you all did a great job of getting it out there. There's going to be an open seat, and it was myself and two sitting aldermen that actually ran. So hopefully we can get it out there, and people will respond. Because you're right, there's 5 open seats. I don't know how many of those people, I've not talked to them as far as how many of them are going to look to stay on. I would hope that they would, but that's going to be their choosing. I will say I'm very proud of the current council that we currently have, because there's so many different points of view that get discussed, and I think that's very healthy for the city. And if somebody wants to run against them, I think that would be then a good conversation of ideas.
We get first of all, we put out the required notices for council, let people know what the filing deadline is and stuff. But I know you look at that and say, well, that's like a public hearing notice. It's on page 10 and it's in a little box. But I don't think council's a real issue, Brandon. I think we get people during the year who nibble on that and say, hey, I'm thinking of running for council. What district am I in? Or, when's the election for my district? And how do I file? That type of thing. So I think even though you don't see a lot of candidates opposing incumbents, I think that's not the bigger problem for us. I think the bigger problem for us is what you've already said before, and that's committees. Because we have people in this community who know about history, they know about parks, and they'd be great on some of our committees, but they don't even know there is a committee called the Historic Preservation Committee, and our Park Recreation and Forestry, and when do they meet? We have to do a much better job of giving people those opportunities, and that's supposed to be kind of a training ground for council. You're supposed to ideally have people running for council who've served on one of the committees or commissions, so they learn a little bit about city government. Not requirement. Bob knows that. He's stepped in and done a great job as a mayor without having come that route. But it's a good way to get people engaged, and we're not getting there right now. I agree.
My last question would be, we have an open house here at the new city hall, I believe, slated for the second week in November.
Correct.
Would you entertain having a side room set aside or an area set aside where maybe there's a session call for that evening or that day where someone that want to entertain being involved in public office or be involved in the committee where they'd be able to sit down with one of the two of you to ask some questions? 'Cause I think a lot of times people in this role, I don't want to put it in a ranking order, but it's a level entry role into politics. And I think there's a lot of times people that don't have more questions than have answers. What better way to get interest in that during the open house of City Hall?
We both thought we were at the top of the ladder, didn't we? What's his entry level thing he's talking about?
Right. That's a great idea. And I think that we should absolutely do that. That is a great idea.
And I'm sure we'd be committed to help promoting it.
Yeah, we could do that. I mean, it may start with just the idea of getting written material to be able to give people at the open house that says, these are the committees, these are what they do. But a personal one-to-one or a group audience, not a bad idea. I mean, the kind of person who's going to come and want to walk through the tour and talk to people at the open house, maybe the very kind of person who would be interested in serving. Could be.
Turn it into a public service job fair.
I thought you were going to say junkie.
There you go.
Have booths,
There, that's right.
tables.
Yeah. Hey, don't go to Park and Rec. No, don't
Right.
talk to them. Talk to me here.
We're still recording.
We all know the context. Listen for context.
That's right.
I guess we can end
Said
on.
Steve Berg in a joking manner.
Oh, no, it's minor.
We need closed captioning for that.
Right.
We can end on a positive note. I mean,
Thank you.
We did get there was a $15,000 donation at the meeting. Was that expected from Friends of the Trail? Was that like part of the Wildwood Trail project, or was that just a separate donation they wished to make to the city?
Yeah, we knew that this was forthcoming. They, I think, had indicated before that they wanted to provide a contribution toward that, supportive of getting that to the finish line. It's still nice to have them come in, present a grossly oversized check, and thank the city for doing this trail project, and make it clear that they're committed to us. So, was it a surprise? No. Was it nice? Yes.
It's always fun to get those big checks. I remember the first night the first actual meeting I did, Marshfield Utilities was there.
Oh, yeah.
And I
yeah.
believe that was a $2 million check. And I'm like, okay, this is pretty fun.
Where did
Well,
the
you know-
actual check go? Who
Who
got the
Who
actual
got the
check?
check?
Yeah, well, yeah. It did.
Was that
I
that
just,
was a wire
I
transfer?
just held it.
What I really want to do on camera is flip it over and do a very large version of endorsing it.
Wouldn't that be
I was
great?
just going to ask. I mean, obviously you work in banking. Is that can you just take that right in there and just hand it to them?
That'd be a lot of fun, just to take it in, like Steve said, and endorse it. No, unfortunately, those don't
Those don't cash.
don't cash. They're really hard to fit in
I mean, how do you
the
get
register.
it through the tube?
Right, exactly. Right, Steve? There's all these things.
Sand going down the chimney.
I suppose you could take one of those,
Shaker.
well, it doesn't have the account number at the bottom, so you can't just do it.
We'll replace those tubes with storm sewer pipes. They're 42 inches.
Right.
I think 42, that's pretty close. Can I throw one more thing in before we wrap up? Just to promote again the budget meetings. We're backing them up 1 week now, so we're going to get publicity out. That'll be the 22nd and 29th of October, and then the 5th of November, all 3 Mondays, all 3 non-Packer games. I see Green Bay's playing this coming Monday, so thankfully we're not conflicting with that. I think it's 5:30 on the 22nd, 6 o'clock on the 29th, and then 6 o'clock on the 5th of November. But again, I just want you to get the word out. People oftentimes will say, I'd love to see you spend money on this, but I don't know what you'd cut, so I guess I can't, I don't know how this all fits in. If you've got an idea, bring it forth. You don't have to have the full picture. Say, I'd like to see spending increased here or cut here. I'd like to see my taxes reduced. I'd like to see more emphasis on the downtown. Whatever your idea is, even if you don't have a fully baked plan or proposal, please email, call, stop at a meeting. Again, I say this all the time, but you have no idea how impactful an email is to this council. I get it. I forward it to Bob and everybody else. People start talking about it almost immediately. Bring it to us.
So how's the format of that meeting work? I mean, do you go budget by line item, or how is that? So, I mean, with council, with most meetings, we have availability for public comment, right?
Yeah.
And then you dive into the discussion that is on the agenda. In these budget meetings, is it pretty much like a town hall in a sense, or is it citizens have to address their concerns at the beginning of the meeting for the committee to review?
Just like our regular meetings, the citizens will have a chance at all three of these at the beginning to give public comment. So at the very first one, before I even make my presentation on the 22nd, they can step forward and say, doggone it, would you please finally take care of this park and get some better equipment out there? And then I'll present, and then what we'll do is go through grouping by grouping, not line by line, not even department by department, but I'll take the public safety groups and I'll say, look, as you look at the public safety groups, here's the 10 things that are different. We're buying a fire engine for $700,000 or whatever it is. And call those out, call out overages or changes from last year. And then we have all the department heads there. You'll see at that portion of the meeting, you'll see Rick Grams, Scott Owen, others who need to be part of that discussion. And they'll be waiting for you to call them to the podium as council members and the mayor saying, gosh, I'm looking at this and how come your supplies are up 20%? What am I missing here? But we'll do it in groupings rather than line by line or department by department.
And when do you make your presentation available to the public? So is it, you have the meeting on the 22nd, is there a 2 or 3 day period where that's available to the public to review so they could come to that first meeting and have questions?
The budget itself will be out late next week. My presentation, which will be a PowerPoint, sometimes I'm even working on that on the day of, trying to make it as clear and concise as I can. I think the better move is that afterwards I'll make it available to anybody who wants it. But even that afternoon, I'm not making this up. Even that afternoon, I'm usually still tweaking it to have it come out in a way that's understandable and clear.
And where do you publish it next week?
The budget itself, I know we put it on the website. I'm not sure what we do beyond that.
Is that
We can look at-
under your, where would it be located in the website?
I think it's right on the homepage as a link. The link will be right on the homepage.
Okay.
And we need to let people know that.
Didn't you used to have hard copies at the library or something?
We still have a hard copy at the library and one at City Hall. We've stopped printing a lot of hard copies because just of the time and energy involved. But library and City Hall will both have a hard copy for people to peruse.